people talk about the fact that two applications cannot collide or influence in some way, we are thinking somewhere of isolation, which could be through namespaces or through control groups, right? Everybody with me? Now, in the Windows world, in 2006, around that time frame, if people have done a bit of Windows Win32 systems programming, you would know something called a job object. The job object essentially does something what the control group does. But in the Windows world, you don't have something which is analogous to the namespace. The second thing which a lot of people talk about or mention and say, yeah, it's great, is free BSD jails. Now, what exactly is a jail? Any guesses? Any thoughts? Jail? The word jail has been sort of like, we hear it often.
It's like a partition kind of.
That will be partition. So you take a hard disk, you take a part of a chunk of a disk, and say, look, this is where I'm going to write my stuff. That's a partition. Now, what's a jail? Okay, how would you do that?
It's isolated.
Great. The word is isolate. Great. So I will not allow forwarding, or I will do controlled forwarding. Great. Can you quantify what you are saying?
root of.
Exactly. So now what happens is, if you see, one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that when we talk about chroot, anybody who has done Gentoo installation, Arch Linux installation, Linux from scratch, would know this whole notion that you have to chroot a system from live CD into an environment and then install your system, right? So you see a fake slash. Okay. Now, if we go with a conventional system, these are things that we take in together and package, and then get going, right? So then the question is, how do you do a slash in Windows? Any thoughts? What's the slash in Windows? Okay, C colon. I bought a 500 GB hard disk that did C colon, D colon, E colon, F colon. Now what's a slash? What's the equivalent to slash? So the question I'm trying to kind of put across is, do the people see that is there a root in Windows? Is there a root in Windows? Yes or no?
You just say use tools like Sigwin or something to simulate a root where you are.
Let's say you don't have Sigwin, now what?
Run as administrator.
That is just a role in which you are running it. Run as. It's a role. So you are applying a credential onto an object.
You are elevating that
Privilege.
It's like USC.
So what's the slash? Is there a slash in Windows? This is a very fundamental question. So in Windows also you have a slash, but it's hidden from you. Why I want to highlight these points is because these points can't be sort of put into a slide and kind of shown, or you can kind of think through it. So in Windows is something called as a backslash, a global, GLOBAL, and there are 3 question marks. Then you again have a backslash, and then you have a C. This is what internally maps to a C colon. So what would be a D colon? Backslash global question mark backslash D, and so on, E and so on so forth. So this backslash global question mark is the root. Now this is not understood in the Linux world, right? We have one slash. Why I'm bringing this point to you is because when you look at Docker, you're actually looking at something which is right straight on top of Linux. When you're asking it to be available on Windows, So if you want to make a Win32 call, you essentially have to load a DLL, the Win anti-DLL. And through that you get an entry point. So now your call comes into NTDLL. From NTDLL, the call has to go inside the kernel. Right? Now, if that has to happen, then this piece of the bridging code, which is written in Docker, has to change. Right? And if this part is exposed, then in some sense, some layer has to be introduced in between. So between the Win32 kernel interface, you have a layer on top, which is called as VM compute. Alright? So all your Docker calls that go through end up at VM compute. They never go beyond that. Because beyond that is NTDLL. So now Docker virtualizes or Docker isolates processes. So how do you make a process? In the Linux world, Unix world, how do you do a process? Fork system call, right? Everybody's with me? And that process begins to run because always a fork exit, right? So it's an active entity. In Windows, how do you create a process? You call a function, a Win32 API called create process. What it does, it creates a process which is dormant. It gives you a handle. It has a link to a thread local storage. It has links to other resources, but it doesn't do anything. Right?
You need to have a thread inside.
Exactly. Because if I were to use the term, the schedulable entity in the Windows world is a thread. So only when a thread gets scheduled can the process become live. This restriction is not, I mean, this kind of concept is not there in Windows, in the Linux world. Of course, slowly Unix, so Linux has in the recent times become something called KSE, kernel scheduled entities, trying to come somewhere like that. But Docker doesn't have that thought process when it's built in that layer. So this part again has to be adjusted to the Docker reality. So Docker in some sense on Windows is actually a port wherein both the parties, the Windows world and the Docker world, are learning what Docker doesn't understand about Windows and what Windows doesn't know about the assumption Docker has made because built on Linux. Okay? So let me simple thing like a concept called PID. What will you map it to? So in order to be able to iterate on this, what the Microsoft guys did, they put in a layer in between called VM compute, and then because Docker is written in Go, so you need to have some kind of a layer through which you can call. They have something called HCS shim. So there are two projects. One is called .NET Virtualization and one is called HCS shim, which are available on GitHub, which are open source projects running by Microsoft. These are the two projects which have defined the entry point for Docker engine to run on top of Windows. And what does Microsoft contribute to this? Not only patches, but also the VM compute.dll. So in the initial stages, what is to happen was, many of the calls will go into VM compute.dll, imagine this is a layer, call comes, and then part of it goes to Hyper-V, rest of it goes to the visual system call. But the story doesn't end here. This is because the way a resource, for example, if you say create file, how do you create a file in the Unix Linux world? You want to create a file called meetup.txt. How do you do that? Okay, in a system call. React. So F open somewhere will come and hit and create, which will go and hit an I open. People have read that, right? Somewhere. What is the equivalent to that in Windows?
Create file.
Create file. What is it?
Basically, at the end of the function call, it gives a handle to the file.
Handle. But what happened inside the kernel? Was there a actual